Everyone, I want to introduce you to Deborah. She is our EPA representative and has been so generous in supporting us in this project. So I'm really happy you can join us.
Thank you. Hi, I'm from Region 6 and I live in Las Cruces. I work in the El Paso office, but work out of my home here in Las Cruces.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming.
Of course. I'm excited to watch the video.
And thank you. I'm joining Deborah Telles as well. I'm with EPA Region 6 El Paso Water Office. And there were also others that received the information from Deborah. So thank you.
Wonderful. So happy to have you here. Yeah,
thanks for coming.
But everyone knows the collaborative itself has been really generously funded through the EPA Environmental Justice Collaborative Problem Solving Grant, which has been a huge help. And then one of our collaborative members, TVAA, also has the Environmental Justice Small Grant and has been doing some work with that. So we're really thankful for the partnership there. And Judy Torres, who's on the call, is the director of TVAA. All right, well, before we begin, I want to go ahead and introduce some of our collaborative members. So the Rio Fernando Collaborative is made up of a lot of different nonprofits and governmental entities. So we have the town of Taos, we have Fritz Hahn here with us tonight. We have Taos County and we have Candace O'Donnell here with us this evening. Judy Torres is the director of TVAA, and we also have Vicente Fernandez also representing TVAA. We have Taos Land Trust, Amigos Bravos, so that's Ben Wright and Shannon Romling. We have the U.S. Forest Service, the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, just a whole bunch of really, really great and dedicated people. So thank you all for being here. Okay, and I think, yeah, let's go ahead and start. And I'll just keep letting people in as they filter in.
Okay.
And actually, sorry, before you do begin, so a little bit of background on this film series. So our initial idea before COVID hit was that we were going to do a lot of, outreach and have people be really connected to the river. And with the pandemic, we had to get a little bit more creative. And so we thought, why not do a watershed tour by film and just allow people to, one, visually see the river itself, because I think a lot of us, even if we've lived in Taos for our whole lives, sometimes don't even know that we're walking across the Rio Fernando. So to increase awareness in that way, but also to highlight some of the different issues that are happening in the different sections of the river, because it goes through our entire community, from La Jara all the way through to Rio Fernando Park and Cornelio Basin, as you'll see in these films, and to see those different issues and also the collaborative solutions that are coming about to address those issues and the way that different agencies and entities are working together and individually. So I hope that it's educational and informative, and I'm just happy to see you all here.
China, could I just give a quick introduction of you? China is our fearless facilitator of the Rio Fernando Collaborative group, and she's been working really hard for several years with us, and just wanted to add that in. Thank you for all your work, China.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. Thank you for that.
That's great. All right, so why don't we jump in? We've got 24 people here, and we'll just let folks in as they come. So you probably all recall the first video that we, for the upper part of the watershed, that we hosted a screening for in November, and you are welcome to view that on the Rio Fernando Collaborative YouTube channel. It's available there. So we'll jump right into number 2. I hope everybody can see that.
Yeah, so far so good.
So here we go. Part 2 of Lazos Verdes, a tour of the Rio Fernando Watershed.
The middle stretch of the Rio Fernando runs from Valle Escondido to the Acequia Diversion Dam on the edge of the town of Taos. Here, the canyon begins to narrow from the wide open meadows of the upper watershed. Riparian forest cover increases, and so do human impacts to the river. Below Mondragon Canyon, homes and businesses begin to crowd the Rio Fernando. Many of these structures are built right next to the river. Some are actually built over the river. In this section, many of the historic wetlands, the natural storage and water cleansing systems in the watershed, are gone or degraded. The river rushes through, scouring the riverbed and increasing erosion along its banks. With more homes come more roads. State Highway 64 parallels the river. The highway sees a large amount of traffic each year. Hundreds of other, smaller roads crisscross the middle section of the river. Stormwater runoff from the roads picks up pollutants such as heavy metals, brake linings, and road salts, which then contaminate waters. Dirt and gravel roads contribute large amounts of sediment to the river, impacting fish habitat and overall water quality, while the lack of riparian vegetation reduces biodiversity. Another challenge faced by the Rio Fernando in the middle section of the watershed is the presence of a large number of home septic tanks. Septic tanks frequently leak into the groundwater. Science suggests that any area with more than one septic tank per 16 acres is likely to have water pollution above acceptable standards. In this section of the river, the number and density of homes means that the indicator threshold of one septic tank per 16 acres is regularly exceeded. Extensive water quality testing undertaken by collaborative member Amigos Bravos in 2019 showed a wide range of sources that contribute to E. coli contamination in this section of the river.
My name's Shannon Romeling. I work with Amigos Bravos. The Rio Fernando has been sampled for many years and has been found to have E. coli at higher levels than recommended by our state and federal regulations. So a watershed-based plan is a way for us to look at the Rio Fernando's E. coli problem and to determine ways to clean up the river from this problem. We sampled E. coli throughout the river for 2 years, and then we worked with stakeholders to come up with ways to clean up the river. One of the major sources of the E. coli were septic tanks and septic systems in general. We can actually source the DNA of this E. coli, and much of it was found to be from humans, especially in the lower segment. We found this segment to the water to be fairly clean of E. coli. One general reason for that is the abundance of springs that allow this section of the river to have more water than other portions of the river.
Microbial source tracking demonstrated that contamination comes from many species, including cows, birds, humans, and dogs. Domestic dogs and cows were the highest sources of E. coli contamination above this section of the river. Hikers frequently complain of a large amount of dog waste along trails that border the Rio Fernando. The Rio Fernando Collaborative is working with homeowners and dog walkers to increase awareness around the issue of dog waste and general backyard waste management. Current work includes efforts to bring more pet waste bags to popular trailheads. Recreation along the rivers can also negatively impact water quality. The popular El Nogal trailhead sees thousands of vehicles per year. El Nogal serves some of the most heavily used hiking and mountain biking trails in the Taos area, as well as a nearby campground. While hiking and mountain biking are some of the lower impact activities seen along the Rio Fernando, trails and parking lots do contribute sediment and pollutants and, as we have seen, dog waste to the river. Just below the El Nogal trailhead, the Rio Fernando spreads out into a small wetland pond before meeting the irrigation diversion dam that waters much of our community's agricultural land. In the next segment, we will dive into how the Rio Fernando feeds our acequia landscape, town and county properties, and our public parks. For hundreds of years, Taos Valley farmers have used the waters of the Rio Fernando to irrigate their farms and fields. The dam that diverts the waters of the Rio Fernando to the acequias is known as a compuerta. Acequias are a democratic system of water governance which requires water to be shared equitably among its members, the parciantes. Two systems, the Acequia Madre del Sur del Cañón and the Acequia Madre del Norte del Cañón, are fed from the Rio Fernando, supplying water to thousands of acres and hundreds of parciantes.
I'm Vicente Fernandez. I'm the mayordomo for the Acequia Madre del Sur del Cañón. I'm also a member of the Rio Fernando Taos Collaborative. The Rio Fernando feeds 6 acequias. The major acequias that it feeds are the Acequia Madre del Sur, Acequia Madre del Norte, the Randall Pond, the Healy Romo, and several other ditches below that. There are several hundred parciantes on the Rio Fernandez. They irrigate mostly alfalfa, which is the big crop, home gardens, orchards, and some livestock. The Rio Fernando has a priority date of 1796, and we've shared water with all the other acequias according to the need. We've had to adjust our first day of irrigation back a month earlier. Normally we would start irrigating in April, now we start irrigating in March, and that's all due to climate change. And by the time June rolls around, the river's almost out of water or is out of water by late June.
From the Acequia Compuerta, the character of the Rio Fernando changes dramatically. Acequias divert water from the river and channel it across the landscape for 6 to 8 weeks each summer. Much of that water is stored for use in the Randall Reservoir. Constructed in 1905 to water hundreds of acres of fruit trees that no longer exist, the reservoir today is utilized to divert water to smaller farms and orchards and for fire suppression. As water availability decreases throughout the watershed and use increases, the river often runs dry in June and July. In light of the increasingly tangible impacts of climate change, acequia commissioners and many acequia members are brainstorming ways to find more equitable paths of sharing water. They are also seeking ways to ensure the river itself is viewed as a parciante and maintains its right to run, alive and bubbling with water, through the summer months.
Hi everybody, I'm George Fritz Hahn, the mayordomo and treasurer of the Vigili Romo Acequia and one of your Town of Taos counselors. Our water comes from way up high in the La Jara headwaters up Taos Canyon. Many of the old timers will tell me that the Rio Fernando did used to run 12 months a year. Of course, now it doesn't. And of course, as most of you realize, we are in a long-term severe drought situation that's going to go on for a long time. We have a number of other impacts. The primary one is urbanization. We have new homes being built. We have lands that were once used for farming that are going fallow and being sold as individual properties for homes. When we have parciantes who are not using their water rights, the surface water doesn't go on their properties. When it doesn't go onto their properties, there's a lack of recharge for your deep aquifers. There's a lack of revitalization in the canopy. And obviously our springs that used to feed this river from the Presa all the way down to the Rio Pueblo, most of them are non-existent now, and it's a direct result of a lack of surface water irrigation. What is happening right now is that all of the acequias on the Rio Fernando, we met last week thanks to the Taos Valley Acequia Association's facilitation and working out a water sharing agreement. That'll bring the water all the way down here to the V Hill, and then we'll be able to send it further down to the Jose Benito Martinez ditch just a little bit west of us here, and they'll be able to send it down even further to the Alamitos. So we'll have gone a long way at extending the water season of water in the river. So we're all charged with trying to care for and increase the quantity and quality of water from La Jara Canyon at the headwaters all the way down to the Rio Pueblo. A huge hope from my perspective is the creation of this Stream Commission. And job number one for us will be to begin to discuss that there's a solution, a fair solution in the offing.
As the Rio Fernando winds its way into town, it runs up against a range of challenges. One of these comes in the community of Cañón, where an important county road runs right up against the river for several miles. The narrow, two-way road dumps sediment, pollution, and other debris into the Rio Fernando every year. Because the river is so accessible through this part of Taos, people frequently use the dried up riverbed as a convenient dumping ground for residential trash and old appliances. The road itself is falling into the river in some places.
My name is Candace O'Donnell. I am a Taos County Commissioner in my second term, and I've been with the Collaborative for a number of years. Los Patos Road is a dirt road. As in most dirt roads that run along rivers, the main issue would be road material running into the river during times of flooding or heavy downpour. The sedimentation of the road materials causes the river to be undermined.
Another issue is accessibility. While the river in this section is theoretically accessible to walkers and bikers, the dangerous nature of Los Pandos Road prohibits the community from experiencing the river safely. Many Taos residents don't even know that the Rio Fernando runs through the center of town and therefore have not developed a relationship with the watershed. To become advocates for the watershed, first, people must develop connections to and knowledge about the river. Los Pandos Road isn't the only place street pollution enters the Rio Fernando. Stormwater runoff from parking lots, building roofs, and other streets, including the main highway through town, carry oils, grease, and toxic chemicals from motor vehicles into the river. Stormwater runoff also carries pesticides and fertilizers from lawns and gardens, viruses, bacteria, as well as nutrients from pet waste and road salts. The Rio Fernando de Taos Revitalization Collaborative is working to address these issues through green stormwater runoff plans and through community education and outreach. The collaborative is also working with civic partners to improve the situation with more progressive planning and zoning. In 2015, the Taos Land Trust purchased a 20-acre farm right in the middle of Taos and along the Rio Fernando. Over the past several years, the Land Trust has undertaken an intensive restoration project on the 7 acres of wetland running through the old farm, now known as Rio Fernando Park. Thanks to the restoration work, the Rio Fernando, often dry above the park, bubbles back to life from springs fed by groundwater. Already, beavers have returned to this portion of the Rio Fernando, and the park is known as a top birding area, gaining status as an eBird hotspot with Cornell University. Right next door to Rio Fernando Park lies Fred Baca Park, owned and operated by the town of Taos. The Rio Fernando runs lazily through the two parks, providing a rich ecological habitat. About 15 acres of Fred Baca Park are dedicated to wetland protection, making the whole complex a green jewel of healing for the Little River, right in the heart of Taos.
Okay, well, those are the films. I know that it's always a little bit choppy showing it through Zoom, but I hope that you all could see it okay. And if not, they're also available on our YouTube page. So I'll go ahead and drop the link into the chat, and we can share it out on Facebook, etc. So you can view them on your own time too, if you just want to watch them again or watch them with more clarity. So if anyone has questions or comments, let's go ahead and get started with those now. And we have, all of our or a lot of our collaborative members here, but also our specific panelists. So I know that we probably cover a range of questions. And again, feel free to put them in the chat or just to unmute yourself and ask the question out loud.
It's been a long day.
Okay, well, I guess my question is, how is everyone doing? Because I hope you're all doing well. I see, okay, so Susan McCarthy put in the chat, tell us again the location of part 1. Yeah, so the part 1 video, and thank you, Shannon, for putting that in there. That's just the upper watershed, and so it starts in La Jara, and then it goes down a bit further until what we're, kind of arbitrarily designating as the middle watershed. But definitely feel free to watch the video, and it's detailing more of those upper watershed issues.
Joe, did you have a question?
No.
Okay.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, please.
My video's not working, so.
Hi, good to see you.
I was wondering, Fritz, you were talking about, I didn't realize that you needed surface water in order to like charge the springs. Could you say more, or that's what I heard. Am I understanding that right? I didn't know that. And then also a second question is, I was wondering why the Toppo Reservoir is empty.
Well, thanks for that, that question, Susan. Yes, that's based on observations. So for instance, when we think about our 20 acres adjacent to Fred Baca Park called the Cornelio Basin, there's an old apple orchard up there. First of all, let me pay a little homage to Cornelio Vigil, for whom the basin is named after. Cornelio was the last one to farm that area. He had a small vegetable garden, a small orchard. He used to handle that whole 20 acres of irrigation very simply, just one man. And so I always like to mention his name and let people know how the basin got its name. So it's after Cornelio Vigil. And even though I never met the man, I am honored to be able to work on the property that he helped bring to life. So back to the little apple orchard I was mentioning, there's a little ojito or a little spring up in where the old orchard is. And some of these trees still exist, Susan. They're, gosh, probably 75 years old. I couldn't tell you. But when we run the water into the basin, that ojito springs up. So think of it as an underground river that now finds a channel that once it's full, it starts to emit onto the surface. Another example is that we have springs in the river itself. And it's a very interesting river. Our mayordomo on the Acequia Madre, Bobby Jaramillo, would say that below the Rio Fernando is yet a subterranean Rio Fernando traveling pretty much in parallel with it. And when the river is running, those ojitos will fill up and spring to the surface. So it's kind of a natural hydrological event. It's very interesting to see, especially in the Cornelio Basin that apparently looks moonscape dry. But when we can get water on it, suddenly those springs start to emerge. There are others here that are far more experienced and expert than I. Perhaps they can go into this a little bit deeper, but that's what I've noticed. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, that's really interesting.
China, could I add to that just really quickly? I think that was a great explanation and observations. And one way I look at it is we think of our wetlands as sponges of the watershed, so they can store water for longer and release it during drought. And you can start to think about agricultural areas in that way, because while they are, of course, using water, they're also releasing water back into the system. So they're kind of starting to work as that sponge, like a wetland would work. And so I think that's why you see things like springs start popping back up, because you're slowly connecting the groundwater table to the, to the surface water table. And that's what you want. You want them to be connected and not disconnected. And so agriculture can help decrease that disconnect when some of the water is going back into the system.
Great, thank you.
And I think this next question is going to be directed at you also. So we have here in the chat, it was mentioned about septic tanks leaking into the arroyo when septic density is higher than planned. Has there been any seepage from the arroyo to septic tanks as well? And what health risk do you foresee with this reverse flow?
That's a very interesting question. I can't say I've thought about it a ton, but it could go the other direction. And that wouldn't be good just because the river can already have E. coli in it from just upstream of where you are, because of what we've found from our research, and just because, it is a very used river and a very small river. So what health risk do you foresee? So I would be most concerned about the E. coli, that bacteria can be damaging, especially to the young and the old. Most of us would just get sick for a couple days, but some could get severely sick. And so definitely the concern would be in both directions there, not just for the river, but if the river is leaking into your well or your well, especially your drinking water, that would not be good. And I could just add that it's recommended based on how many people are in your household to have your septic tank checked every 3 to 5 years. So I think if it's like a 1-person household, it's more like 5 years. And if it's a very, very busy house, you might want to check it more like 4 years or even 3 if it's very frequently used.
Thank you.
I've got a question for both Councillor Hahn and Vicente. We mentioned in the third video about the water sharing agreements, and I'm curious, like, how do these work? Is there a set process through the state or through the Acequia Association, or just how does that process work?
Okay, this is Vicente. Normally, it's each acequia has a mayordomo attached to it, and each acequia has its own commission. And depending on the acequia and the commission and the mayordomo, that has to do a lot with whether you share water or you don't. Traditionally, water has been shared, but during this time, it's become quite an issue. We started out with the stream commission, and we ran into some hiccups based upon the water sharing, I can't say for the other mayordomos what they do or can't do, but that it's up to each acequia as to how they share the water.
So I guess, so there isn't like a formal process necessarily that is, I guess that is guided by the New Mexico Acequia Association or the state or anything like that. Nothing formalized, I guess.
No, traditionally it's been sort of a gentleman's agreement. You get together, you shake hands and you share, and that's how it's been done for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
We've never used any kind of formal type, in writing per se for the acequias. But again, that's up to each mayordomo and each commission as to how they share their water.
Cool, thank you.
Great. Other questions that people are having?
This is Deborah. Could you expand a little more on the green stormwater plans that were mentioned in the video?
Yeah, absolutely. So Shannon, I might lean on you for this one too, because I know you were involved a bit more in that process. I feel like the green stormwater, runoff plans that have been designed are really important. I think that there are some that can come to fruition. We had at one point thought of doing more of a demonstration style, like rain garden, and then decided that, it'd be a better use of resources to do something that was, really in action more than just a demonstration. But Shannon, what was your experience with that process and maybe moving forward with Amigos Bravos and looking at green infrastructure solutions for the river and just Taos in general?
I think we've had some preliminary areas looked at, like near the courthouse by a engineer who would do that sort of work. Biohabitats is who we usually work with. And then we've done some work getting a design for near Taos Library, and that the closest river that would affect is the Rio Fernando, just working to decrease the stormwater runoff in that area, and we have the plans for that done. But I think one of the big projects we've talked about wanting to do is some sort of plan for Los Pandos and like what could be done about the road. So we haven't done anything on that, but I was wondering, I thought it'd be interesting to talk about that a little bit and just what we could do.
China. I have kind of a follow-up to that. Good job, everybody. Good to see everyone. But I wonder if there was anything with the new Paseo. Did we talk to DOT, and is there any, I don't know, did you influence that crossing at all?
We definitely tried, but I can't say that we've had much success. I mean, they've been communicative for years, but when it came down to actually like what can we do, they didn't really allow anything, because the right of way is so small where the bridge crosses the river, right by Montes Chowcart there, and it's so small that there's not really any room to even like build anything. So, you know, even put like trees or bushes or something there to capture the rainwater. And so, you know, I said, well, what can we do? And they basically said, we're not able to do anything. You know, they weren't willing to think outside the box of how can we make this work. They said, well, if you want to reach out to landowners, maybe, but we haven't had success with any of them in that area. So I did think about reaching out to ABC Lock, which is across the street, again, because they've been receptive in the past to our work. But it was a bit, didn't go anywhere like I hoped it would. And while for years they kept saying, yeah, we'll work with you, when it came down to it, their funds and space and the right of way were what was brought
up. One of the questions that we have in the chat is are there any plans for a walking path or a green area along the Rio Fernando from, say, Montes area down to Rio Fernando Park and Fred Baca Park? And I would just add on to that question, is there any plans or any discussion about walking paths in any other section of the Rio Fernando upstream of Fred Baca and Rio Fernando Park?
Yeah, Christina, I don't know if you want to take this question. Christina is the executive director of the Taos Land Trust and has been really active in just creating more park accessibility and, you know, spearheading some walking and path restoration trails.
Hi, everybody. You know, I think that, you know, we have explored plans for that over the last several years, but we always run into challenges with private land ownership and along the acequia. You know, I think it's something that we, you know, should consider again. And this is an opportunity, I think, for us to look at state and federal funds for that kind of public access, particularly through, I think, the LWCF Land Water Conservation Fund. There are additional challenges with that, and that we have to come up with a one-to-one match to meet some of those requirements. But there are efforts at the state that could allow us to tap into that funding for this kind of purpose, for acquisition and trail development. But it will take a long time, and it will also take the just continued partnership with our federal, state, and local jurisdiction partners, the town of Taos and the Taos County. So that's a long way of saying, yes, we'd like to, and we'll continue to work on it. And one more thing about the Department of Transportation, I think it is, it's important for us to look at where we are in the process with them, and funding and budgets. And, you know, we should explore the possibility of, you know, of funding projects through the DOT, through the interim committee process, through the New Mexico State Legislature, you know, working directly with that committee. You know, the chair of that committee at the state level in the state legislature, Angelica Rubio, is committed to looking at pathways and, you know, human pedaled transportation on bikes or on foot. And so I think this is really, this is probably the time to start pushing projects like that forward, you know, through the committee process, and then it'll eventually, you know, get into the budget of the Department of Transportation.
Commissioner O'Donnell, do you want to take a stab at that question also about trails and accessibility to the Rio Fernando going forward?
Well, the video had mentioned Los Pandos Road, which is a dirt road, a narrow road. And the issue is there are homes right up against the road. So we could say possibly the issue would be, would property owners give easement for, say, a walking path or a sedimentation pond? And that is a difficult process, as you know. We cannot force property owners to give easement rights along the river. There are a few stretches by the county courthouse, but there may be just a couple thousand feet where people could walk along the river that's open. And so with Los Pandos, if we were to pave it, the same issues apply in that we have our culverts, and the culverts run across the road, and there are culverts that dump into the river. And the issue is, where else would you send the water? Because once again, you would have to get a property owner saying, yeah, you can send the water over to my land. We have no place to send the water in these culverts. And it is a common issue across the county where acequias are along roads.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Commissioner, while we have you right there, and you're warmed up now, I'm thinking, you know, that section of the video where we talked about Los Pandos Road. Can you dive into some more of the options of what we might look at for dealing with that issue? It seems like a tough one.
The best we could do right now is have our road crew create bar ditches and then bank dirt along the river so it wouldn't go into the river. But then we have to make sure if there's a bar ditch and a heavy flood, where is that water going to end up? Still probably going to end up in the river. And Los Pandos, it could be paved. Then you're talking about speeding issues. And I have approached the county on making it a one-way. I think it would be very complicated, confuse a lot of people. I mean, if you're talking about a one-way to help for people to walk along that road, it is treacherous to walk along that road. People do not obey the speed limit, even on a dirt road. So unfortunately, there are really no easy answers to those particular problems with storm drainage runoff.
Thank you. So in the chat we have from Miguel. Hi, thank you for joining. Good to see you. You know that the Acequia Madre del Pueblo should be in on this conversation because it also helps deliver water to downstream users. And Judy and Vicente and Joe even, you know, are those conversations that are happening? Would you like to speak to that, you know, question or concern, just to clarify that a little bit?
This is Vicente. The Acequia Madre del Pueblo runs into the Don Fernando there at Los Pandos. They're at the, what we used to call the Inglada Flume, but which is not. However, they haven't been irrigating those fields below the Mariposa apartments. That's where all that water, all those fields are irrigated from, and they haven't been irrigating those fields for years now. The only excess water that comes through that acequia now is from the Acequia del Norte. Now, if a lot of the landowners were probably to request water from Bobby, that could happen. But the thing is that none of the landowners are requesting water, so there's no reason for Bobby to let the water go unless he has irrigators on that ditch.
Thanks. So the next question in the chat is, throughout the video, it stated that the source of water in the arroyo is from springs, but my question is if the source of water in the spring is because of the snowmelt upstream or up in the watershed, or does it have another source of underground water? So are the springs only fed by the runoff, or are they also self-generating? I feel like this, kind of goes really nicely with the first question that we had earlier. And Fritz, I don't know if you want to speak to this again, or whoever wants to tackle this. It's a good question.
This is Shannon. I would say that they're fed by both, rain, snowmelt, and underground water. And it does sort of go back to what I was saying about how there's a groundwater table and then there's your surface water table. And as we have drought and we use the water in the river, the groundwater table, and we don't have wetlands to store anything, the groundwater table drops. And even though our river is dropping a little bit too, it never catches up and it's not allowed to flood, which replenishes that surface water table and allows it to reach the ground. So it definitely would affect the springs as well.
Yeah, and earlier Miguel had brought up this report from NMSU, and it's super great, and the link is in the chat, but I would definitely recommend, honestly, everyone to read it. It's a compilation of 10 years of research detailing acequias and aquifer recharge, but also some of just these hydrologic systems that we have that are so unique to our community and our valley. So yeah, definitely check that out.
Shannon, one point that a lot of the people don't know is that the Rio Fernando has the most seepage of any of the streams in the valley. So a lot of people wonder sometimes that part of the river has water and part of it doesn't, but it goes underground. And if you've seen the Don Fernando and Ranchitos, those springs always have water. So the river may be dry, but that portion of Don Fernando always has water.
Right, thanks for adding that. Absolutely.
Other questions that folks are having?
I have one question.
Yeah.
And this is for Commissioner O'Donnell. Is there any move afoot to make it have the county come up with a land use plan so people can clean the river along their properties? Because if you noticed in Los Pandos, a lot of those properties abut the river, and there is so much waste along the river. Is there any way that the county can force these people to clean back on their properties? They're also a fire hazard, as you have seen.
We are working on a clean and livable ordinance which would give more teeth. There are a few state statutes for public nuisances that could be addressed. But the issue is going through legal means can sometimes not, it doesn't result in anything. Even when you threaten people, they still don't do anything. So I think the best thing is if our solid waste code enforcement officer could have a friendly chat with these property owners and see see if they would be willing. Because right now, even if we did create this clean and livable ordinance, which would cite people for having debris along the river or all their brush or trash or junk cars, there's still the due process where, people have their right for their day in court. So you can cite them, but then you have to give them time to correct that deficiency. And if it goes to court, they have that right to due process. So we are working on that, and I hope it helps, but it's probably really goes back to neighborly conversations with people if they are neighborly to begin with, and educating them on what's happening when they, leave their debris near the river. And I know that is a big concern of yours, Vicente. And I think just the first starting point would be to see if our solid waste could have friendly conversations with a few of these property owners in the meantime.
Okay, thank you.
Shannon, there's a question in the chat for you specifically. Is the Rio Fernando currently listed as an impaired stream by the EPA? And also a big thank you to everyone working on this. And that's from Meg. Thank you, Meg.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Yes, it is. It's listed in its 3 different segments, and they have different impairments. But for example, they're all impaired for E. coli, but the lower segment is impaired for many other things, such as sediment, temperature, and a couple other that I'm forgetting right now. But yeah, there's more problems, and as we saw in the videos, than just the E. coli, and most of those are recognized by the EPA.
So there's another question. Has there been knowledge exchange on subsurface water runoff and management with other arroyo springs, acequias, and or research on the subject that has been documented? So I would say, just in terms of the cross-pollination of knowledge amongst acequias and water users in New Mexico, there's definitely a lot of it that's going on. And I think even kind of expanding beyond just northern New Mexico itself, like we are looking at these systems in terms of how they relate to systems in Spain and North Africa as well. Like there's such a knowledge exchange that's happening in that sense. But I think to answer that question really specifically, I would turn it to, again, Judy, Vicente, or Joe, or someone who wants to speak to that. But yeah, my general answer to that is yes, although I don't know about the documentation of it as much.
Many of the documentation is, from the early 1900s or late 1800s. So there's not really anything that we're using now specifically with the adjudication or with the settlement agreement. The special master did write, customs and traditions as part of it. So it's up to the acequias themselves to share the water or to decide if they're going to do it customarily or how they're going to share the water. But I think most, like Vicente said, most acequias should just do it as a gentleman's agreement and do it what's fair for everybody, and everybody gets their share of water.
Thank you. And I think we have some questions coming in from Facebook, so Jim will read those out.
Yeah, so just in terms of the discussion about cleaning up private property, Jeremiah Martin said it's expensive to hire people to do property cleanup, so maybe there could be some fundraising and community effort to help people who do not have the financial means to do large cleanup projects. Less of a question, more of a statement for us to consider.
Yeah, if anyone wants to jump in on that, feel free. I think it is really important to be looking at these different financing options.
This is Vicente, and my belief is it's your property, it's your responsibility to keep it clean. We shouldn't depend on any outside sources to clean our own backyard. We need to take personal responsibility for a lot of this. And the thing is as Candace was saying, the waste management can go out and write tickets. Maybe that'll get their attention. But the thing is if we don't do something, at least go out there and cite them, we're not doing anything to fix the problem. We need to get something like that done.
China, I'd like to add, this group has, we discussed today about potentially organizing a Rio Fernando based cleanup sometime later this summer. So be on the lookout for that. There's just very initial talks today. And yeah, I think that was the that was the main thing. Oh, also I wanted to share that the group also has funding from the New Mexico Environment Department to create backyard waste management workshops for the community, specifically for the Rio Fernando backyard waste issues. So there'll be 2 workshops coming up about that, and then there'll also be like a really informationally filled packet about, you know, options to get rid of your backyard waste and options to find, you know, cheaper way, you know, affordable ways to do things, hopefully. And we'll try to, you know, make backyard waste cleanup as accessible and easy for people to learn about and hopefully do in their backyards. And if we can keep, you know, start doing cleanup events as a group, maybe we can get a lot of community support for that sort of thing. And hopefully the workshops will help us work towards that.
I did want to point out regarding the statement made about helping people. Government entities cannot, it's an anti-donation issue. Foundations, maybe, you know, if you got funding from private groups that would be willing, and then, but still, then we're talking about, you'd still probably have to hire someone like Rocky Mountain Youth Corps to go in there, pay them to clean it up. And all these worst case scenarios for, say, abandoned structures. If there are abandoned structures and the property owners are noticed to secure their houses that are wide open that people can go into, we could go in and demolish the building, but then we'd have a lien on the property, or we'd do condemnation, which nobody likes to do condemnation. So how you solve this issue, we still can't cite people, Vicente, until we have an ordinance, unless we cite under a state statute. And like I said, it becomes a real issue for the legal department to do that. So that's where we go back to conversations, education. And that is a problem when people can barely survive, or they're on drugs or alcohol and they don't care about their property and they throw all their trash right next to the river. So it's a complex situation. And a sad one.
Thank you. From Miguel in the chat, what can be done about all of the salt and pumice application over the winter? Salt is affecting the quality in soils and pumice is faulting the stream bed. Like that might be a question for Fritz and Candace as our public representatives, but I feel like that's almost a question for DOT, which unfortunately we don't have represented.
We normally don't use a lot of salt. We mix it with scoria. So, but yes, that salt can be a problem.
And then Candace, for you as well, Carlos has asked, are there ordinances for the mayordomo or other agency enforcement inspectors to act?
On what?
I believe this is in reference to cleaning the river, but Carlos, if you want to even just unmute yourself and ask the question, that would be great.
Thank you. I'm following into what Vicente was saying, is that, you know, we just have to do ourselves and take care of ourselves and do a better job. So then the question came in indirectly, Candice, when you were talking a little bit, you know, about ordinances. So in a way, you can answer because for any of the you know, stakeholders or departments, they have authority as inspectors. There must be an ordinance in order to act or enforce as to maintaining the water flow clean. I was referring to that.
Yes, and there was a year when a tree flooded our road. There was a big downpour, and our county crews did go in and remove that tree. We still need some more guidance from the Bureau of Reclamation, how far we can go with that. I think individually we can get down into the riverbed and pick up trash and remove large debris by hand. And if there are issues with, as we had a meeting today discussing trees have fallen in the river on Forest Service property, and we just need to find out what their specific policy is, because a lot of people would think you leave the logs in the river, it helps to hold back the water and replenish the underground basin. But I don't know if Peter Rich is still here, but we are going to get some direction on that, because then it becomes, does the Forest Service have the crews to remove those trees? Or we are working on an MOU with the Forest Service where we might be able to assist them, but we still need some guidance.
Yeah, Candace, I'd say in general, that's usually our take, is that a tree in a river is not a bad thing on the forest. It's creating habitat, it's, holding back water. Unless it's causing some other issue, like flooding into somebody's property or causing a safety issue for some reason. But generally we're not gonna put resources toward moving trees out of the stream bed.
Thanks for jumping in on that, Peter. Did that feel like it answered the question, Carlos, or is there more around that?
No, yeah, it did. Thank you.
Cool, absolutely. Great, well, other questions? And if not, I know that it's an evening on a Thursday, and we can certainly wrap up early.
This is Deborah. Just a quick question about kind of future activities. I think all the filming's done, correct? So where do you go to next?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the filming is done, thankfully. And we have visions of turning this into a larger film one day, but I think for right now we're taking a film hiatus. But it was a good experience. And yeah, so we just spent the last few meetings really prioritizing our work for 2021 and even into 2022 and saying, okay, what are we as a collaborative going to be doing together? And, focusing on our 3 issue areas of acequias, the healthy river, and increasing access to the river through trails and parks, et cetera. And so one of the things that we're working on right now is we just hired a consultant to be addressing a really severe cut bank issue that's happening in the river. So this is erosion that happens when the river gets really channelized. And he's working to bring together private landowners and public entities and soil and water, et cetera, and some engineers to look at, both maybe more green infrastructure solutions to that. So we're not just always hardening the bank of the river and then pushing the channelization further downstream. So he'll be doing that, but then also hopefully creating some type of working group around this so that we can be taking kind of this really acute experience of, river degradation and looking at the entire watershed with it. So I'm excited to have him on board, and that'll be great. And then in terms of acequias, we're doing a lot of different things, but one of the things is working with the other environmental justice grant that we have to be doing outreach to realtors and title companies and working with them to both provide them education around rights and responsibilities of acequia homeowners, but also hoping to pass that information and education along to new homeowners and newcomers to Taos who aren't familiar with these traditions and the importance of your individual responsibility to your acequia and to the community. And so that's really important for a lot of reasons, and I'm excited to see that happening. And then we've been kind of daydreaming and visioning into this idea of creating another mini park somewhere or another trail, just somewhere to get the community to be able to have more access to the river. And we haven't found a location that that is maybe an easy entry point for that, but we're still working hard and trying to brainstorm different ways of, just creating more trails along the waterway. Yeah. Okay.
I guess I know that we're about finishing, but I just would like to commend you all. That was a fantastic video. And I had always envisioned visiting Taos. I had never been to Taos myself, but I wanted to see the river firsthand, but this was the next best thing. So I commend you on that. The whole, the wording that you chose, yeah, I think it was you speaking. It was at a good volume, good topics that you all addressed, and you all live in a beautiful area. This is an excellent project. I hope you continue to clean it and keep it as beautiful as it is. I'm just amazed by how beautiful it really is up there.
Thank you so much. And I hope you get to come visit one day soon and see it in person. It'd be really lovely.
Too. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you to all of you out there who helped us make those videos. So Fritz, Judy, Christina, Ben, everybody, just really appreciate you all jumping in and helping us out. Candace, you too.
And Vicente as well.
Vicente. Yeah, everybody.
Everyone, honestly, like the whole collaborative. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you guys.
Thank you. And if there are any other questions, I do just want to let people know that you can always visit our website, which is just riofernando.org. And there's a list of our collaborative member emails on there and their phone numbers. So if you have a specific question for Shannon, for instance, like you can find her contact information there. And you can also get in touch with us as a collaborative itself. So if things come up, feel free to reach out. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Good evening.